Welcome to my presentation today. My name is Stephanie Borland. Today we are going to be looking at how to make the Grade 9, Grade 10 Foods and Nutrition, or course code HFN, more accessible, enjoyable, and have greater engagement for students with cerebral palsy. There are three main areas we are going to look at. The first is looking at what is cerebral palsy, some definitions and symptoms. The second is about characteristic needs and what works with students with cerebral palsy or CP may look like in your classroom and some strategies for doing so. And finally, looking at social and academic needs through such avenues that support universal design for learning and differential instructional practices. So, what is CP? CP is a disorder that affects the muscle and or brain of an individual and is the most common motor disability in childhood as it affects the student's ability to maintain balance and posture. CP can be caused by abnormal brain development during pregnancy, difficulties at birth, or damage to a developing brain. CP comes with several varying characteristics and needs. There are four main types of CP. Spastic CP can have characteristics of stiff muscles leading to awkward movements. This could become challenging in a foods room when trying to cut vegetables, stir a pot, or reaching for high or low down items. Dyskinetic CP can also be known as athetoid, chorioathetoid, and dystonic CP. Those with dyskinetic CP face challenges with controlling movements in their limbs as well as their face and tongue, can also be affected, causing them to have trouble speaking or being understood, which may affect social interactions within a classroom. Those with dyskinetic CP can have muscle tone changes from day to day or even over the course of one day, making their ability to do certain tasks depending on how they are feeling that day. Dyskinetic CP may cause challenges to be understood or heard in a busy foods room with a multi-group cooking. Ataxic CP can lead a student to have balance and coordination problems with troubles in quick movement or high coordination activities, such as dicing an onion. And finally, there is mixed CP, which is caused when there are more than one type of symptoms. The most common type of CP that can be seen is spastic CP, and the most common type of mixed CP is called spastic dyskinetic CP, leading an individual to potentially have stiff muscles, difficulties in limb movement in the face and tongue, and muscle tone changes. So the needs in the classroom, now that we have gone over different types of CP and their characteristics and challenges that may be faced, what are some needs in the classroom that you may see, and how could we support these needs to make the students have a successful and engaging and inclusive time in our room? One step could involve modifying the kitchen tools and devices they may use. These devices can be found through sites such as occupational therapist avenues that may be accessible at your school through specific budgets and could include things such as a one-handed brush cleaner to help with cleaning dishes at the end of a lab, or a non-slip cutting board with food spikes to help anchor foods in place while a student is cutting, especially if they only have limited movement in one limb. Visual recipes might also help students with CP to break down the steps further if cognition is impaired. Visual recipes could include picture demonstrations of the task being performed to make the dish. For example, a photo of someone cutting an onion when the instruction says, dice onion. Rearranging furniture and removing barriers can help students with CP who require mobility devices such as a wheelchair or a walker to move freely around the kitchen space. And this sometimes may mean removing certain items such as desks altogether. Another need that may be seen in the kitchen layout is to be adjusted to foster independence and self-advocacy. As mentioned in previous slides, mobility may be affected and muscle can become stiff and movement difficult for a student with CP. Thus, moving more frequently used items to shelves students can access on their own or laying them out prior to lab and thinking about the layout through the eyes of the students can help promote the independence and self-advocacy in your room, in turn reducing the need for potential assistance from others. Bringing the student in and working with them to adjust the kitchen layout is also a great way to think about what could be done to support the student and have them involved in the process. Social and academic needs is also an area to think about when working with students who have CP. Using Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, and differentiated instruction, or DI, practices are great ways to be aware of how to make your classroom more inclusive for students with CP and for others who may benefit from the adaptations, accommodations made. The ADAPT model supports DI practices in your classroom and follows 5 easy steps for educators to follow, which are shown on the screen now. Using ADAPT, educators can expand on these steps to foster social and academic needs in the classroom. Step 1 accounts of students' strengths and needs. This could look like taking a student's visual strengths and creating visual schedules or recipes for the student to follow. It could also include moving items lower to account for the strength in mobility or a student may have. A student who may have strength in humor or personability could be placed in a group with students who may be quieter or have differing strengths in the student to help foster a positive social interaction, allowing for the student to work off of each other's strengths. Step 2, demands of the classroom should continue to take mobility into account for a student with CP. Students with CP may also need longer processing times between transition and to write tests and quizzes so that they may utilize what was discussed in Step 1. This is especially the case if their brain has been affected from CP. Allowing for longer times to complete such things as tests and quizzes, even though a completely differentiated step for a student with CP could also be beneficial for a whole class, as others may have stronger outcomes if given more time to complete a test, which then would make this a universal design for learning if you were to take that step. However, it also works for differential instruction as well. Step 3, adaptation, should keep following the thought of mobility adaptations needed to be made into the room. Do things need to be moved lower? What would a step stool help? Do we need to remove desks to fit a wheelchair or walk around the space safely? All these things could be taken into account when adapting the space. Adapting the jobs could also include providing adaptive tools like cutting boards with spike food holders, non-tilt bowls so the bowl sits while the student is stirring with one hand, and so on. Step 4, perspectives and consequences should always keep the student involved when appropriate to promote the self-advocacy, especially as the student moves through senior grades in secondary school. This step also allows time to discuss with additional supports, such as an educational assistant, to see what is working and what is not. Did the accommodation of moving items in the kitchen not benefit the student? What could be done instead? Did the student refuse to use that new cutting board with food spikes? Now what are you going to do? This is all things that could be gone over during this step. The final steps, Step 5, teach and assess the match, allows for a more critical, deep approach to make sure the match of accommodations made are working well with the student. Talking with EAs, occupational therapists, developmental educational heads, developmental education teacher, if the student is placed in your room from a developmental education program, can help promote the assurance that the program in place is working with the student's strengths and needs in mind. Did the student do well with the new kitchen layout? Great. What are the next steps to take to continue to promote these strengths? UDL can help educators develop programs that are not only good just for a student with CP, but many others in the room as well. The Center for Applied Special Technology, or CAST, followed universal design of creating principles to support learning environments that are accessible for all. They developed a plan for all learners that follow the basic approaches of the why of learning, the of learning, and the how of learning. The why of learning calls for multiple or flexible ways to engage learners in the curriculum. This could look like rotating lab jobs during food lab days, giving students options on how to approach a specific learning outcome while completing assessments as well. The what of learning is using multiple or flexible representations of the information and concepts. Instead of just a slideshow, why not a recorded video or an infographic to help display information such as kitchen safety to allow students to grasp the concept at hand. Finally, the how of learning follows multiple or flexible options on expression and performance of learning. Short videos, recorded podcasts, or animations are all different ways a student with CP and their peers could show their knowledge and understanding of learning, all while doing it. In food labs, too, this could look like plating foods in different ways to show expression and performance of the skill learned while in lab. For example, if they were learning knife safety skills, maybe plating different cuts of vegetables or fruit on a plate to visually show what they have learned. What we need to remember as educators is that all students, even those with CP, have great and unique individual personalities. They bring different abilities and needs into our classroom every day they walk through the door. By following UDL and DI approaches discussed in this presentation, we as educators can promote more integrated and welcoming classrooms where all students feel safe and like they belong. Temple Grandin is a famous professor of animal husbandry who has autism and has been an autism advocate for many years. She once said, and quote, "I am different but not less." Take this quote from Temple Grandin forward. By applying it to the different students you meet, you will see how special their differences is, and maybe you'll be the one that learns from them. Thank you for listening.